Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Chuck Bartok here in beautiful Northern California on the banks of the Sacramento River. Sitting right next to me, believe it or not, a friend that I met. I had the privilege of meeting in 1970. Jim and his beautiful wife, Mary, moved to San Clemente. We became business associates, and that's 45 years ago. And what's fascinated me in the past few years, Jim moved to a city called Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And I'll ask him the first question. Jim, what prompted you to move to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin?
9/11. At that point in my life, I could live just about anywhere, and I had a daughter running the Knickerbocker Hotel in Chicago and a son in Deerfield, Illinois, and my parents up in De Pere. So I tried to pick a place that was close enough, but not in their backyards, and that little pin on the map ended up being Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Very good. Shirley and I had the privilege of visiting you there this last September, and I can see what drew you to it. A most beautiful place, and I was very impressed with the people that I met there. I met some wonderful Midwestern people. I'm very partial to the Midwest, and even though I live on the left coast of anyway, I live in California, but in Northern California, which is a little different than Los Angeles. Jim, you did something that fascinated me. We got back together again about 4 years ago. What did you do that's really strange in today's day?
Well, I started a local newspaper, and I didn't intend to start a local newspaper. I was hanging out in a little coffee shop called the Geneva Java, and the young lady running the shop came to me and said that the shop was failing. Is there anything I could suggest to help? Well, being a writer, that's why I was hanging out in the coffee shop every day, is to write other things. I said what we need is a newsletter that will circulate around town, because this little coffee shop is in a basement and we need better exposure. People don't know we're here. They don't know you're wonderful. They don't know it's a terrific, warm spot in the universe. So she said, great. So I sat down and penned out what became the Geneva Shore Report. I called it that for no reason I can think of. And I wrote about local events and what was going on around the lake from the way I saw it, one page, and then with her picture on it and her place, and I passed it around town. And the next day I came into the coffee shop, and she informed me that her friends and relatives had indicated that the things I had to say were too controversial and that she could no longer support it. I tried to describe the situation to her, that she was failing and that any notice at all would be better than no notice, but she didn't see it that way. So in frustration, I had already written a second issue. I went out into the streets, and there was a festival going on in town, and I started handing these papers out and came back to the coffee shop. A few days later, a young lady came in and said, I've just lost my job and I need a job. And she was really nice, and I had seen her before. So I said, well, why don't you become operations manager for my new newspaper? What newspaper? Well, I
two issues on the street.
Really. So at that point I said, well, we'll try a few issues and see if it works. And I had a few extra dollars, and so I started paying her to print it while I wrote it. And that became, then every Wednesday we would walk around town trying to get people to take our little one-page circular. And it was fairly controversial at the time, mostly because of the humor. I was reporting on lake temperatures, what kind of fish were down there, how far it was you were going to fall from the pier down to the water, that sort of thing, how wide the boats were, who were going around there, who owned them, and that. And then as this evolved slowly but surely, we figured out that the businesses would allow us to put little stacks of the papers there. So we started with 2 or 3 businesses that grew to 10 or 20, and up to the day we circulate, I think, around 60 businesses around the lake, where we put out our free circular, which became the newspaper when local politics started to automatically insert themselves into the paper. Things were going on around the lake that were just, well, frankly, outrageous. So I started writing about them. Without much intent other than to reveal that, gee, isn't it amazing that, everybody got taxed overnight and no one knew it was coming. Things like that. And I thought that was rather strange. Or all of a sudden the monopoly of the boats on the lake is given over to one person, and he gets a giant bank loan, and at the same day the city of Lake Geneva moves its bank account to the bank that gave him the loan that he's on the board of directors of. And I thought that needed noting. The local newspaper, the Lake Geneva, the regional news, wasn't reporting such things. Well, we developed a small following. It became a Wednesday thing. We grew to two pages, and then 3. And I think we're now at 8 pages as we changed formats. And there became a crying need for a publication that would reveal things in advance. And so all council meetings and village meetings around the lake are now attended by our people, and they report on what happens in those meetings that's going to impact on people's futures, so that at the next meetings, before these decisions are implemented, that people can show up, and they have in great numbers. And so now the big effect I noticed, and I spoke on at a village meeting in Town of Lynn, was that the room was full. And so I was being asked to speak on the issue, and I really didn't. Instead, I was blown away by the crowd. And I said, does anybody see what's happened here? And I would like to thank you, because you've made me a part of something really grand. You're all here, and you look up at the counselors at their desks, and they're all poring over the information and thinking about their vote. Your presence, without you saying a word, has caused them to grow in importance in their own eyes, and to give importance to the issues that they're deciding on with respect to your lives and theirs. And that wasn't really there before. Before, they would just all get together and go, oh yeah, this, or oh yeah, that. And they didn't really realize, because you weren't here, to give them emotional impact of what it was they were deciding. And now today, this is all happening, and I'm a part of it. And it's like an accidental series of events that's led me down the shoals of life to arrive at 4 years and 4 months later as the head of an outfit that actually has a bigger payroll than the Lake Geneva Regional News, but is more quietly delivered and accepted. And on the internet, we're as popular as the regional news, but we're just this small local little outfit that rushes out. We don't follow ambulances or all that. We found out following ambulances leads to a heart attack, theirs and yours, and they're hardly worthwhile. But we will report on events like that, although we've also made a decision, unlike other newspapers, we don't cover people's backgrounds, we don't cover crime, we don't even cover sports. We cover what's happening local and what's likely to impact on you, what's the condition of the small businesses, and how's the financing going with that, what kind of help can be provided, snow shoveling, potholes that appear, we pinpoint where they are, and just the seemingly small stuff that people really do have an interest in, but they had no place to go for it. And so, yeah. But that doesn't mean everyone loves us. I was at the optical shop yesterday handing out the paper, and the guy said, can I have one of those? Who was a customer in the store. And I said, sure, you like the Geneva Shore Report? And he said, hell no, but I read the damn thing, give it to me. So I did, and I basically was ready to tell him that I only hand the paper out, I don't really write it. But I didn't have to do that. And I liked it.
This history and story, Jim, I mean, I've told our audience, you and I have known each other for 45 years. When we both lived in a very, at that time, small community in Southern California named San Clemente, we both were active in our community in many ways. And we were young. We were, late 20s, early 30s. And that ability to be involved locally, at least it showed me that we as individuals can make an impact. Now, when you can surround yourself with others who are of like mind, who think maybe not in all respects the same, but have a common goal, build a boys club, clean up a lake, build a beach facility or whatever, it can be done. I can't impact Washington, D.C. as an individual, but I can impact Corning, California. You've proven it in Lake Geneva. And I want to share one aspect, and I'm surprised you didn't mention it. Was it about a year ago, you talked about you say that you're impacting locally, but in this case, you impacted more than locally, about the cell phone. Would you share with us the story about cell phone towers and what you think, or what we know, the Geneva Shore Report was impactful on?
Well, you can impact what I've discovered in the last 4 years. I had no intention of impacting outside the local area. But we're, as life would have it, when you're investigating and driving around, we call ourselves the X-Files investigators, and we go around looking for trouble, or not, and taking pictures. And so every time we got to a low area, we couldn't talk on our cell phones around the lake because it's hilly. And so I thought, looking at cell phones, which we could see, there were 9 around town, that I would get a cell phone service where I could see the tower, and therefore I would get great service. Mm-hmm. So I did. Well, it didn't work. At that point, I realized, sitting at the tower for the AT&T service I had, I'm at the tower, 10 feet away, and I can't get service. I've got 1 bar sometimes. So I walked over to the tower and looked at the meters and saw that there was no electricity going to the tower. And I said, well, the tower's not on. But I wanted to make sure, so we went out and spent some money, bought some meters, and hired a guy who's an expert at cell phones, and he came back with us, and sure enough, there's no transmissions. So we went to the other 8 towers, only to discover that there were no transmissions there either. And I thought, that's really peculiar. Why would they all be shut down? So then I started exploring around in an ever larger circle to discover that the closest cell phone tower turned on was 9 miles away in Elkhorn. And that was a Verizon tower. And I thought, well, then I went to the offices of those companies, the sales offices, only to be banned later from those offices because I was asking questions that they either couldn't or didn't want to answer about cell phone towers.
Could you say that part again slowly? You were what at those offices?
Banned. They told me that I would need the permission of their attorneys to enter their offices.
Interesting.
Yes.
First Amendment rights.
I then went and pulled the laws on the cell phone towers and began doing some history to discover that years before, the federal government, the taxpayers, had paid a couple $2 billion to build these tens of thousands of cell phone towers around the nation to support cell phones in rural areas, because the rural areas couldn't afford to build their own towers. So we did it in general, a good move by the government. But in the writing of that bill, they never put in that writing that the cell phone towers that they built for billions of dollars of taxpayer money had to be turned on. And I thought, well, that's peculiar. Why wouldn't they turn them on? Well, the expert that I had hired, going around from tower to tower to check the electric meters and everything else, said, well, every time they don't turn on a tower, they save $800 a month at least in electricity. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what's $800 to a cell phone company? He said, well, you're pretty good at math, Jim. Why don't you multiply 15,000 times $800 a month? And then it hit me what was going on. And I said, well, don't they have to provide service? He said, the contracts all use this word, adequate. They provide adequate service, and it's their decision what is adequate for you in your area, and therefore they don't have to turn the towers on. I ran a series of stories 2 years ago on this very problem, and I indicated not only was it a problem here, but it was probably a problem nationally, and secondly, that it's also a violation of the antitrust laws because the cell phone towers were all in it together. You see, if anybody broke from the pack, then that would lead to a competitive situation over the other cell phone companies, so they had to be in league. Well, right after that, a year later, not right after that, U.S. Cellular turned on its towers in Lake Geneva, and we all flocked to U.S. Cellular once we found that out. I ran it in the paper. In fact, the line out the U.S. Cellular door was 100 yards long of people waiting to turn to that service. We had an impact. locally. Did we have one nationally? Yeah. 6 months later, billboards began to appear around Lake Geneva and the nation, with U.S. Cellular having an ad campaign saying they are now the preferred carrier in rural areas. This little town newspaper reached out, and all over the nation, the impact was felt. Were we credited for that? No, because this is real life. Credit gets taken by others, but we don't care, because around Lake Geneva, if you have a U.S. Cellular telephone, you can get service, and that's what we were after. We think that's what rural areas of the nation are after, and so we're happy if we provided that service.
You know, you just said, were you credited? And you and I, we've lived similar lives in a lot of ways, and I don't think we ever did things with the prime purpose of being credited. We were motivated, and many of our friends were the same, for getting the job done. And people listening to this today, tomorrow, in the future, you have a global mind because you've been privileged, or had the privilege, if you want to call it that, of spending time globally. And the same problems that you witnessed in Lake Geneva, a very nice community, much more eloquent than where I live, in Corning, California, great town, nothing like Lake Geneva. You have seen similar problems. I know you mentioned a few days ago that you were in Hawaii, not a few days ago, but we talked about your trip to Hawaii, and you saw and discussed with residents some minor problems in a local community that the local government was responsible for, but could be mitigated very easily. And you were actually asked at that time to possibly franchise your newspaper to Hawaii, which of course would be a very difficult thing unless we got up and moved there. It
was on Kauai, and I'd gone to Haleiwa, and they had a village meeting there, and I went there as a joke because I had a bunch of old GSRs, Geneva Shore Reports, in my briefcase when I was traveling, and I didn't know it. So I dragged those out, and I thought, well, heck, I'll go see how their village meeting is out here, and I'll I'll get rid of these GSRs and see what people think. It's fun, because you usually get comments with our paper. So I passed them all out, and I went to the meeting, and what I heard at the meeting was so outrageous that I stood up at the meeting to speak about the Pure facility and the new building they were going to build, and the fact that this was going to be done by people who were actually going to be paid, who were sitting making the decision about what it was going to be. And I thought that the citizenry should be informed that they might not necessarily be objective about what was going to be done because they were going to directly profit. And that although it can be legal, it needs to be looked at with a discerning eye so that you make sure that you know where the money's going. A lot of it's about the money. And so when I got done, I was done. I left the meeting, and I was going back to my hotel when people came out of the meeting and chased me down and said, who are you? I said, well, I'm from Lake Geneva. Well, what's this paper? And I explained what it was and what had happened in Lake Geneva and the surrounding area that motivates the production of the paper. And they said, well, can you do that here? I said, well, I don't live here. I live in Lake Geneva, and you would need someone here that was of the same bent and possible capability, and also generosity. The Geneva Shore Report is not free to put out. It's free to receive, but it's done as a community service. And that is an expensive proposition that most people are not going to pay $6,000 a month to put out a weekly circular because it's the right thing to do. You see, doing the right thing isn't necessarily what society functions on. Doing the survival thing is what survival is all about. And lots of times that's in conflict with what we might think of as doing the right thing. And so somewhere in there, we try to make the Geneva Shore Report doing the right thing as best we can, but never forgetting that all news is an opinion. All video is an opinion of what actually happened in front of you, because You aren't just seeing the video, you're seeing an overwrite of people speaking about it.
It's interesting,
and with
Jim.
that in mind, I left Kauai without getting lynched.
You just mentioned video, and there's a big push on the internet. This platform, Blab, is here because people felt that people talking to each other, I've been on Blab talking to people in Australia, which is amazing. How could I see that person and talk to them this way? But video that we see on television is not always what it's purported to be, because we're seeing snippets of what portion of that total video people wanted us to see. I just bring that up because truth is something you write about quite a bit in your opinion editorials. And I encourage people to, anybody listening to this at some other time, GenevaShoreReport.com. Just don't worry about Lake Geneva's daily news or weekly news, because it doesn't affect you. But read Jim's editorial opinions or his editorials. They're more global. What he writes about is a global perspective from an individual. And you don't have to agree with him, but he sure writes a thought-provoking editorial. Along the Geneva Shore Report side of it, I understand in the December 2nd issue, the front page has a picture of one of your best friends, the mayor, who has not always been treated probably as friendly as people might want to be through your news.
Jim Connors is the mayor. And I've always liked Jim Connors. He just hasn't always liked me.
I know. I understand that. But something happened, and I'm an outsider, but I get the newspaper delivered to my home in California. I'm involved in making sure that it's digitized, and that is always up on Geneva Shore Report's Facebook page. But something very probably not expected happened at the Lake Geneva City Council meeting Monday night. Do you want to share with our listeners what happened Monday night? And do you feel that your newspaper had an impact in that result?
Well, I think we've, probably 3.5 years ago, people came to us and said, you can't take on certain forces. You can't take on, at the time, the American Legion was out of control doing certain things, the JCs, several people, the city administrator and the government, that these forces will come and get you. All right. And so we said, well, okay, we've been come and gotten before, so what the heck?
Yeah, nothing new.
And we went at it. So we haven't lost too many battles, and we've had this constant difficulty with development, because I think development is the future. That's where you're building things, and it's very important that we continue to grow and do that. It's called civilization. But the way in which you do that, how you make sure that this is done on top of the table, that everything is there for everyone to analyze, and then decisions can be made. And the problem is, in local government and national government, you are deliberately being told about things afterward because they don't want you involved, the decision makers, in making their decisions for them. Even though by mandate, supposedly, the public is supposed to be very involved. They are supposedly public servants. But that isn't how cultures and societies develop. Those people become patrician and, an aristocracy. And that's what's happened locally as well as nationally in many cases. So the power of a free media is to pry that loose a bit. And so the mayor has always been extremely pro-development of almost any kind. It didn't matter. And part of the problem we've had locally here, and you have nationally as well, is that bait and switch. Developers would come in and promise to do this, and if they could get the right zoning, if they could get the right plan change, which would value the property higher, then they didn't do that. They took advantage of the higher value and either sold or built part of the development and departed. We had 7 of those developments around town. We didn't want any more. So here we had one that was going to be like that. These people were going to put in a big artificial lake. Well, they weren't going to put in an artificial lake because they would have had to line it, gotten water out of the aquifer, cleaned it before. It wouldn't make any sense for them to do that. So it was another bait and switch the way we saw it. And the mayor was very much in favor of these developers. And then on the night of the decision, he stood up and turned around and went the other way, and everybody followed him, and that development did not get done. And we like to think that what we're writing and what we're circulating had something to do with the mayor responding to that. In fact, to the point where we offered in this issue to retract and recant on using his nickname, which we've called him Gumby now for a couple of years, and change that to Lancelot or something more appropriate if he's going to conduct himself caring about the actual citizenry, the residents and the visitors of this place instead of just the land. We are not just stewards of the land. We are stewards of the citizens and residents and visitors as well. And they need to be responded to. That's who we really work for. And
you know, what I found interesting, Jim, in following the history of this, which your newspaper so well documented over the last several months, the initialization was a local businessman, and I've always been in favor. I mean, I promote my local businessmen as long as they have integrity and so on. But I was amazed when I did my own research is that that was sold twice to now a non-local entity. If that's the same one I'm thinking about,
it's a different but you know, don't go in the wrong direction. There's nothing wrong with non-local entities. I mean, I understand. That's competition. You know, of course we support the local, but when we talk about small business in the paper, we're not talking about the national definition of 5,000 employees or less. We're talking about shops that have 1 or 2 employees and mom and pop and running the store and the struggle of that, and yet the vital importance and the vibrance that these small businesses have in your community. And when you're missing a few of these businesses, it's like missing a few front teeth.
Right.
Your community is devastatingly affected, although people may not know why it's so affected. We do. And so we think it's incumbent upon city leadership to take care of these businesses and business people and make sure the vibrance, the breathing, beating heart of the community where people circulate and go. I mean, the coffee shops are important. The little shops where people buy clothing and necessities of all kinds are important. Big boxes, well, they've been a boon in their own way. But the way they've gone about doing business hasn't been helpful to our nation that much because they've drawn people to foreign products made in China. And they've drawn them away from the city centers so that the heartbeat of the city ends up splayed across a landscape that's Walgreens on one corner, Walmart on another corner, traffic signals and gas stations. And that's why you come back from Europe, the backwoods of France, and you have a hangover when you get back to America and travel a strip center drive down through, I don't know, any one of these, Abilene, Texas, or one of these towns. And you don't see things of beauty. You don't see things that attract you. You see things you might need to do, but what about the ambiance? What about the art? What about the thinking? We're all about that, and so we're very protective of the small businesses, and we feature a business, our grandest business every week, and our grandest person, and we make damn sure that we go out and meet these people and talk to them about their business and then write real, fair things about what they're doing.
Jim, How to Think Global and Act Local and your newspaper and your dedication, your passion. It's who you are. I've known you too long. What you're doing, you did mention the fact that this is a self-supported newspaper.
Yes.
To my knowledge, you accept very few, if any, advertisement income.
Business card ads.
Business card, $25 a year.
So I get yelled at all the time. You know, it's $40 a month to put your business card in for 4 weeks of the month, and then if you want to pay, that's nice. If you don't pay, well, okay, I get yelled at some more by the staff. But by keeping business card size ads only, we do not allow outside entities editorial privilege. That we don't have to worry that someone's going to pull their business card and affect the survival of the paper. In fact, several times people have come offering to buy full-page ads, and we just laugh because we know what you really want. You want the influence of paying that money to us and then having us respond to that money. Well, it doesn't work with the Geneva Shore Report.
However, people can subscribe from around the world, well, not around the world, in the US anyway, and have it mailed to them once a week, which may be of advantage to some people to see what you're doing, and maybe be inspired to be more involved in their local situation. Not maybe to put up a newspaper, or maybe 4 or 5 people would like to band together. And
well,
I was amazed.
Go on, make sure you understand, if you're going to be controversial, you're going to be taken controversial.
Oh, yeah.
Recently, only 2 weeks ago, the Wisconsin Newspaper Association turned us down for membership.
Right.
Okay? They said that we could register with them as a non-newspaper.
Yeah.
The truth is, the establishment, for the most part, even in the newspaper industry, is afraid of little publications like ours, especially if we're not driven by advertising and car dealerships and the alcohol industry or energy or any of that, because we're out of control.
Right.
And that same positive that the people may feel who are that core that love reading about that, that's a big negative to the forces that drive big industry and money in many cases. Not all, but in many. And so get ready for some, disappointment when you encounter these organizations.
How about, Jim, the thing that you and I learned many years ago, about 4 decades ago, showing up, because I used to sit at the other side, parking and traffic commissioner, and we'd have our regulars at these meetings because we had to decide, this development is going to go, not go, is there parking and traffic. And whenever strangers showed up in the meeting, 4 or 5 people who are normally not there, it was amazing how our manner changed. And it was amazing how our thought process changed. So again, acting local. We may not be able to start a newspaper. By the way, welcome, Nancy. If you'd like to stop in and say hello, this is Jim Strauss, an old friend who has a local newspaper that has made an impact in his community because he has some steel in his backbone. But somebody living in, I can't remember the Iowa town I was visiting a while back. If 4 or 5 interested citizens would get off their duff, forget television for an hour on Tuesday night, and go down to their city council meeting and listen, and then next time come with a pad of paper, and they can doodle. I mean, they could be doodling, doing a crossword puzzle. It's amazing how those elected public officials sometime start to change the way they conduct business, because all of a sudden they're being watched. And I'm not saying they're dishonest people. I'm not saying they're bad people. But, if things are going your way all the time without anybody monitoring you, it's very easy in politics, as you and I both know, to kind of make things happen that may not be to the benefit of everybody. Nerthus, that's Nancy, I believe, Nancy Hill. Are you talking all publications from a particular perspective or a political perspective? Nancy, I'm interviewing James Strauss, who publishes a weekly newspaper in his hometown in the 4th year now, that has made an impact on things that happen locally. Because the newspaper is totally independent and not beholden to anyone, it can be somewhat scathing, but it tries its best to be honest. So politics, a political perspective, I guess it is a political perspective, but the politic is the benefit of the citizenry. It's not a party politic. It's the benefit of residents. From a particular perspective, watchdog, elected officials, and Jim, you've been elected official. Elected officials need to have some kind of oversight, and the local citizens going to school board meetings, going to city council meetings, going to county meetings can make an impact. She says she's politically active, but she encourages all voices. Absolutely. Jim, you accept all input. There's been some very scathing letters written to your newspaper.
We publish them.
You publish them. Also, it's kind of interesting. You personally, in some instances, possibly have been maligned by local authorities in different instances. But knowing you, and fortunately and unfortunately, knowing you for all these years, you just don't put up with the BS. I mean, you believe in what you believe. And I know that to be true because I've known you too damn long. So I don't know if Nancy is politically active, and I applaud anybody who's politically active. However, Jim might concur or not, being politically active means that you allow your mind to obtain information from other sources. And you make your own decision. You do not become a regurgitator of pap. You make your own decisions, good, bad, or indifferent. Jim, your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I don't like the word politics. It replaces a word that's much more meaningful. Politics is nothing more than leadership. And the pursuit of politics is nothing more than the decision-making about who's going to lead us as we move through life in our cultures, societies, and tribes. And yet this word politics has become this negative thing. No, we need leadership, but even more than leadership, we need guidance. And modifying the form of guidance is really what the press is all about. We're not just about telling you what happened. And, you know, I had an argument with the managing editor of the other newspaper because he felt we were too opinionated in almost every story we write. And I went back to him and said, gee, John, you know, you select every week which stories you're going to cover and which you don't. That's a huge opinion expression right there. And yet you're not admitting to that. And the way that you choose to cover a story is also an opinion. We call them stories for a reason, because it's a story about something that happened. It doesn't mean that it happened that way. That's the story we're telling. We seldom write an issue of the GSR that doesn't include a retraction or apology. The only difference that we are is we make them, and we make them on the front page. Okay, that we got it wrong, all right, but we're trying. But we do write opinion, and I think all news, if you would understand that, and all leadership out there is a form of politics. But without, you know, and people say, I don't like politics, I don't want to be involved with it, but then you're opting out of a system of selection to see what kind of leaders you have. And we're very much into that selection and taking risk.
Yeah, I use the term civic engagement.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely correct.
You know, and I think that we do need to engage with people of all perspectives and attempt to show people how to do research. That's one of the big things I do, is how do you find out if this or that or the other thing is from a reliable source? And reliable sources are not just big entities, whether they be left or right. And there's always a perspective that is.
But you know, your facial expressions symbolize something else that isn't talked about very much in this pursuit of guiding our leadership, and that's fun. Okay, you radiate fun. You've got to be able to have fun at this. Believe it or not, if you go to this super boring meeting, it's really entertaining to see, let alone what they're saying, but what they're wearing. I mean, what they're saying to each other.
It's hard not to get angry, you know.
Right. We don't cover certain things because they ridicule. I mean, we had one counselor at this last vitally important meeting sitting there, and she was crocheting. Later on, I told her that I deliberately did not take a picture of that and would not cover that. She doesn't like me, so she didn't really thank me for that. But the fun of watching that and saying, you know, what is that person really doing over there? And
crocheting can be mindless. That's just a man-woman thing. I wouldn't say that's political. But
well, you know, but now to Jim, in deference to the poor young lady that was crocheting, several months ago, an alderman who in your town, I'm reading this through your newspaper, fell asleep at the meeting.
Well, there's that. And, you know, you do have things. I mean, we had one alder person, and I did write it. Maybe I shouldn't. She's an elderly, wonderful lady that's now in a home, but she wrote about the fact that she didn't want to see a dog beach near these boat docks because the boats would be backing up and grinding up the puppies in their propellers. And I just, the whole image of that. And then she followed that up with the fact that if we were going to have, you know, a place for the dogs to go to the bathroom, were we going to divide them by sex? And it was hilarious.
Well,
so
people's concerns are very diverse.
Yeah. Yes.
Nancy,
you know, we don't see nearly the amount of corruption that I thought we would see. We see a withering ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand some of it because here this guy who's a retired preacher, small town preacher, is up there and bang, down on his desk is an 1.5 inch document of what the plan is going to be that he's going to have to approve in the following week. Well, okay, have you ever seen construction plans and then matching these with the ordinances and everything else, and then you're going to have to make a decision whether this happens or not. That's where guidance comes in, and we try to help as a paper by bringing that sort of professional guidance.
I'm very interested in local news, local publication, soliciting input from people and encouraging more participation. You know, ideally by people like me, but by everybody. I think that's
Nancy.
The stories that don't just go. You know, I'll give you a preview of our next national story that's going national. The cell phones went national. Now, how about this? We hired experts and labs, and we started testing gasoline to discover something because of, again, people driving around the community coming up with questions like, how come there's only one tanker truck company and one tanker truck that shows up at all of our gas stations? I said, I don't know. So I went, of course, out to the gas stations to check this out. Now, only to discover that BP, Shell, these companies don't exist anymore. They're franchises, they're names only. They're all getting their gas from a wholesaler. And guess what? There is no regular middle grade or premium anymore. They're all using premium. That way they don't cheat the people who are paying regular prices or whatever. They're just getting a different deal than the person actually paying for the premium. But
that
the premium
sounds like something from the Corporation Commission or...
Because it's cheaper for them to deliver all premium than it is for them to divide it up and have different tanker trucks and all that. And I figured out why. And so now, due to this, you know, and then an offshoot of that was when we found out that they weren't pumping a full gallon of gas.
Yeah.
They were pumping...
He actually took tests and published it in the newspaper. Gasoline from gas station A, here's what a gallon registered on the pump showed up in actual volume.
Yeah. And so things like that are local, but they're not. They're national, really. It's just that nobody else is carrying
that would be easy to check out if you used, although some states have gotten rid of the Department of Weights and Measures. You know, to make sure that your thumb is...
See, in this day and age, they can adjust their machines the day after the guy leaves to do whatever they want. Yeah. That's what the software and hardware on the pumps allow for now. And so guess what? Yeah. They do it. And that's
there are ways to get around that, though, too. There are ways that you can see if things have been tampered with. If code is...
Well, yes and no. Depending, you know, if they want. Also remember what the penalty is. The penalty for them not pumping you a full gallon to be caught is $500.
Yeah.
The penalty for you driving away from a gas pump without paying for it in Wisconsin is a felony.
Yeah.
Okay, the differential is huge. And so can they afford to pay $500 penalties all day long?
But can they afford to lose all their customers if that information becomes public?
That's why it's hard for me to go buy gas right now.
Yeah. In other words, Jim has to get another vehicle to go buy gas for one vehicle. Nancy, where do you live?
Tucson, Arizona.
Oh.
Tucson, a great town. I just was by there when I left Jim in Lake Geneva. We came home I-10 and spent some time in Tucson. I actually, years ago, I used to go to Agua Prieta way too often. and I had some carrots down at that end of the country. But Nancy, the reason this is our first Blab.
Okay, well, you're doing great.
And thank you. And I just want to, the reason we want to interview this is we were going to just do a telephone interview. And I said, Jim, let's try Blab. It took us an hour to get this crap.
Oh, I know.
You know, he's lying. It took me
the one I was supposed to be on didn't work for whoever was
right.
So.
Right. But we're now that Jim understands blabbing, what he is doing and what he has to say is something that people around our country can embrace.
Exactly.
And that was the point of this Blab. We're not here I wanted to show people that a person, it could be you, it could be Jim, it could be me, anybody, who has a desire to truly give and be involved in what happens in their community, because it's my belief that if we had more of this happening, national politics would evolve from the bottom up instead of from the top down. Okay. And of course, I've said it on Blab, some of the Blabs I've been on, because I knew I was always going to bring Jim in, is that most of us allow our minds to be made up by the sound bites we see on television. We do not understand, and this is another point that we're going to come up on another Blab. What you hear and what you see is not always what's real. It's kind of like, well, it's on the internet, I'm going to believe it. Well, Jim and I both know from past history that what you see on television, and when a senator talks to you or a congressman talks to you, and the sound bite that you hear is not always in toto. Okay. So I really appreciate, she's the first guest, Jim, that we've had, you know, and interestingly enough, Jim, we did not have to allow her in. I want to explain this. I'm going to go off record. What I'm going to do, Jim, is I'm going to stop our recording, and maybe the three of us can chat for a few minutes. Shirley is anxious for me to get off of here soon. But this recording, Jim, we'll edit something, you know, because there's a reason for this also. We're going to do an MP3 of it, okay? And, you know, we're going to transcribe it. And
you can edit me out.
Well, we're going to keep, no, you had some good things. And I love the fact, Jim said something that is so true about Blab. You can be on the phone with somebody, and I'm on the phone half my day. Seeing Nancy smile, seeing the inflection, Jim. You said it. You said, wow, this lady's having fun. And here we are talking all this deep crap. You know what? Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Jim Strauss. We're going to hang out for a few minutes, but I am going to stop recording. Thank you.